All right, today we're jumping into a topic that's, well, it's at the very heart of so many modern countries, but it's also the source of some pretty intense debates. We're talking about secularism. What does that word really mean, and why does it look so different from one place to another? Okay, let's get into it. I want you to just pause and think about that for a second. Seriously, what if the government could tell you that you're not allowed to celebrate your most important holidays, or that your church or temple or mosque is illegal? It's a pretty terrifying thought, right? But it's not some far-off fantasy. And that's exactly why we need to talk about secularism. It's this powerful idea designed to protect one of your most fundamental freedoms, the freedom to believe.
So, just look at this contrast. It shows two completely different realities happening on our planet right now. In one country, the state and one specific religion are deeply intertwined. But in another, the system actually protects the right of different religious groups to establish their own educational institutions. Now, this isn't just a minor policy difference. It gets to the very core of how a nation views the relationship between power and faith.
So, this begs the question, what happens when one religious group gets its hands on the levers of state power? Well, history has given us a very clear and often a very brutal answer. When a single religion gains control of the government and all the police power and money that comes with it, they can use that power to dominate and even persecute everyone else. This is the fundamental problem that the idea of secularism was born to solve.
And this phrase, tyranny of the majority, it's not just some abstract political science term. It has real, devastating consequences. We're talking about discrimination, coercion, people losing their jobs, being thrown in jail or worse, all because of what they believe. It's a pattern we've seen play out over and over again throughout history.
So how do you stop that from happening? How do you protect people from that kind of tyranny? Well, the solution that many democracies around the world have settled on is secularism. But what is it, really? Let's break down the core idea.
At its most basic level, this is it. This is the big idea. You separate the power of religion from the power of the state. Simple, right? Well, not exactly. In the real world, it's almost never a perfectly clean break. That line between the two can get really blurry, and how a country decides to draw that line is where things get super interesting.
This quote really just nails it. If secularism has one main job, it's to create that distance, that separation between religious institutions and government power. This is how you try to make sure the state is there to serve all its citizens, whether they're believers, atheists, or somewhere in between, and not just the members of one particular faith. But okay, let's dig a little deeper. Why is it so critical to keep these two things separate? It really comes down to two major reasons, and both are absolutely essential for a free and democratic society to function. So first, and this is a big one, it's to protect religious minorities. A secular state is basically a safeguard against the majority using its power to oppress others. And second, it protects your personal freedom of conscience. It guarantees your right to leave a religion, to join another one, or even just to interpret your own faith differently from the mainstream, all without the government getting involved.
Okay, so that's the theory. Now let's see how this all works in the real world. We're going to zoom in on India, because its approach is really unique. It's not just about a simple, passive separation. It's a very active strategy for managing one of the most religiously diverse populations on the entire planet.
So how does India pull this off? It uses this really interesting three-part strategy. I like to think of the government as a referee in a really complex game. Sometimes the ref needs to stand back and just let the game flow. Other times, they have to step in and blow the whistle. It's all about trying to keep the game fair for everyone. The first strategy is all about keeping a certain distance. This means that government spaces, like public schools or government offices, aren't supposed to promote any one religion. The goal is for the state itself to remain neutral, so that every citizen, no matter their faith, feels like they belong.
Okay, the second strategy is non-interference. This is where the state takes a step back and says, we respect the particular practices of different religious communities. A classic example of this is the exemption for Sikhs from mandatory helmet laws, which allows them to wear the pagri, their turban, which is a sacred article of faith.
And now we get to the third strategy, and this is easily the most unique and, frankly, the most controversial one. This is intervention. This is when the state actually steps into religious affairs to correct what it sees as a major social injustice. The most powerful example is the Indian Constitution's ban on untouchability, a practice of extreme discrimination rooted in the caste system, because it violates fundamental human rights. Now, that idea of the government intervening in religion, that's a really big deal.
In fact, it's one of the main things that makes secularism in India so different from how it's usually understood in the West, especially in a place like the United States. So let's compare these two models side by side.
This table really lays it all out. See, in the US, you often hear about a strict separation, this high wall between church and state. The government is meant to stay completely out of religion's business and vice versa. But in India, it's more like a flexible fence. The state maintains what's called a principled distance. It can stay back, but it can also reach over that fence to help a religious minority or, as we saw, to stop a harmful practice. It's a much more hands-on, dynamic approach.
And here's a great little piece of political history for you. The word secular actually wasn't in the original preamble to India's constitution. It was officially added in 1976. But, and this is the key part, the idea of secularism, this unique balancing act we've been talking about, that was woven into the fabric of the country from day one. Making it official just gave a name to something that was already there.
So after all that, what's the bottom line? If there's one thing you should take away about Indian secularism, what is it?
It all comes down to this. It's an active, ongoing balancing act. It's not a rigid, hands-off separation. It's more like a constant negotiation, with the state acting like that referee, guided by the core principles laid out in its constitution. It's a living, breathing attempt to answer a massive question. How can hundreds of millions of people with completely different beliefs live together in peace and with freedom?
And that really leaves us with a final, big question for you to think about. When it comes to protecting both freedom of religion and freedom from religious oppression, what's the better approach? Do we need a strict, unbreachable wall between the state and religion, or do we need a more flexible fence, one that allows for intervention when our highest ideals are at stake? There is no easy answer. Thanks for joining me on this one.